Welcome to the 19th chapter of the book of Isaiah. It begins the vision of Egyptu, Egypt. Egypt, as we all know, is where the pyramids are, and it's located west of Israel, across the Sinai Desert, and then across today the Suez Canal. Then the Nile River runs up on the eastern side of Egypt, and the civilization began, supposedly, if you read on Wikipedia, back around 10,000 BC with rock carvings and hunter-gatherers. But I don't know if I go along with that. I mean, I suppose it's a possibility, and what do I know? I'm not an anthropologist. But it seems like the anthropologist, somebody's always finding something older and somebody's footprint in the sediment that is a cross between humans and some non-human thing. I don't know, and I don't know if they really know either. But anyway, Wikipedia has the beginning around 10,000 BC. Then it has in 8,000 BC, they became an agricultural society, growing things along the Nile. And then in 6,000 BC, they went into the Neolithic age, the New Stone Age. They started building things. And by 3200 BC, hieroglyphics appeared under King Menes, which was the beginning of the dynasties for 3,000 years. Then, at the time that this Isaiah wrote, was around the 25th dynasty, where actually the nation, the Nubian nation of Cush, which is south of Egypt and is in today's Sudan, came up and took over rule of Egypt and ruled Egypt out of places in Egypt. I'm trying. I think of the reason I'm hesitating because it was in Memphis. I'm pretty sure that's where they ruled. So now we see that this nation of Egypt has come into existence. We also know that there was a nation of Mesopotamia, not a nation, but nation states, city-states, between the Tigris and Euphrates River, which was way east of Egypt, with desert in between and so forth. And this civilization grew up different. It's interesting to find the differences between Egypt and Mesopotamia. You can go on the internet and do a search of that, and you'll find out all sorts of things that one had a unique thing, and where the other one had something completely different. But they were both civilizations that grew up around the same time. Now it says, and behold, the Lord sits upon a nimble cloud. Well, we know that Jesus will return on a cloud, and then he will send the angels and they will trump. This is in the 24th chapter of Matthew, and he will bring the ones that are his into the air to meet him. And God sitting on this cloud is not something that just is, this may be one of the earliest places that this mentions that. But he shall come to Egypt. Well, now when and how this all happens and how God does this, Jesus did go into Egypt, but he was not on a cloud. He was probably on a donkey with his parents, Joseph and Mary. And then he came back to Israel when Herod died. So the Lord sits upon a nimble cloud and shall come to Egypt. So that's that really kind of shows that this is a future time to me of this chapter, because it hasn't happened yet. And then it says, and the handmade idols of Egypt shall be shaken. Hieropeita, pieo, is it making or doing? and hero, Cairo, the handmade idols, and the sais, we have seismic, comes from that, shaking, and the handmade idols of Egypt shall be shaken before his face, and their heart shall be vanquished in them. The Egyptians had these idols that were animalistic, such as the bull, Apis, I think it was called, and the other animal things of the animal kingdom became idols to the Egyptians. And it says, and their heart shall be vanquished in them. So something is going to happen. Well, it did, because a lot of those things ended. It's today a Muslim nation, and idolatry is not tolerated. In verse 2, the Egyptians shall be roused against Egyptians, so some type of a civil war, and every man shall war against his brother, Adelphon, and every man against his neighbor, city against city, and abode against abode. And the spirit of the Egyptians shall be disturbed in themselves. Now, at the time this was written, there were two main centers of power in Egypt. Was Tanis, which was up almost on the Mediterranean, on the Nile Delta, and then further south was Memphis, and they were the two main centers of religious and civil rule in Egypt. But now he says, and I shall efface their plan. So the Egyptians were around for thousands of years. They developed a powerful society. But God says, I shall efface their plan. And they shall ask of their gods and of their statues. Now, the statues that they made were huge. I mean, 10, 15, 20 feet tall. If you go on the internet and you go look up ancient Egypt, you'll see all of these statues that were made sometimes out of a single stone. They were gigantic and sat in front of their temples. So they were experts at that, earliest ones that were able to do anything like that. The Mesopotamians never had anything close to this. They carved on rock walls and into a relief, which is like two-dimensional when you carve into a rock, but it wasn't, they didn't make these huge statues like the Egyptians. And they shall ask of their gods and of their statues, and the ones that speak out from out of the earth, that's probably people that predict things by talking to the dead, and the ones delivering oracles who look at certain things. They cut up livers of animals and look at that and say certain things are going to happen, these types of things. And it continues, and I will deliver up the Egyptian into the hands of men, being hard masters. Well, now when that was, they were already under hard masters, because they were building all these pyramids and tombs into rock and so forth. But the hard masters, I don't know who he is talking about, but this is what's going to happen. And the hard kings shall lord over them. It doesn't say Pharaoh. And thus says the Lord of Sabaoth. And the Egyptians shall drink Ethor, hydro comes from that, water, by the sea. For the river shall fail and shall dry up. So right here we see the first thing that gives us a definite idea that this is in the future, because the Nile River has not failed and has not dried up. And the rivers and the aqueducts of the river shall fail. So they had little aqueducts that came off of the Nile, and they used foot power to irrigate by having people pedal with these buckets that when they turned their leg, it brought buckets up of water and it dumped it out into an aqueduct. And they were able to irrigate and grow things. the Nile area was famous for all the things that they were growing because of this river and irrigation. And all the gathering of water shall be dried up. That hasn't happened. And in every marsh of reed and papyrus. Here you can add this to the English Derivatives book, 3843.1, papiru. It's a transliteration into papyrus. I showed in the last video. I still have that sheet here, piece of papyrus, and they could keep adhesives to glue this, and it kept on going and going, and then they could roll it up fairly well, like right here. You turn it around, and then you put it into a roll, and then you can write on both sides and unroll it and read it, and it can be 10 or 15 feet long. And all the green round about chloron is, we get the word chloroform, the green part of a plant, and all the green round about the river, and all the thing being sown throughout the river, Potamu, as a river. We have the Potomac River in Washington, D.C., which means river. Potomac, Potamu is river. Shall be dried, destroyed by the wind. So this future time of the Nile being dried up from God. And the fishermen shall moan, and all the ones throwing a hook into the river shall moan. So fishermen that have little hooks off of a boat, they're going to moan. And the ones throwing drag nets, so that would be a net that they would throw off on the back of a boat and drag it along as they're going down the river, either under row or under wind, and then they would pull it up and you have the fish. And then that was what the disciples did in the Sea of Galilee. And the casting net fishermen shall mourn. These are ones that had these big, huge, round nets that were 10 or 15 foot, and they were good at throwing them, getting them all out, and then casting them out. And then the net would go down, and then they would wait, and if the fish came on top, then they would pull it up. They had line on the four edges of it or whatever, and they would pull it up and hopefully get fish in that. So all these people that are fishing are going to mourn. And shame shall take the ones working, ergazomenus, ergonomics, working the shredded flax. Linon, we have linen, comes from that. And the ones working, ergazomenus, the vison, that's a different type of a linen type of a material. And the ones working them will be in grief, and all the ones making beer shall be fretful. So apparently they were making alcoholic beverages at that time. And it's all going to come to some type of a halt or slow down. And the souls shall cause pain. And the rulers of Tanis will be morons. Let's go to our map here, and we'll see here the Egyptian Nile Delta. And Tanis is way up here. See, Tanis is up here, and Memphis is down here, lower. Memphis is actually older than Tanis, and Tanis was started maybe 1,000 years later, I believe, but it was silted over with silt here, and it was completely covered Tanis, the city of Tanis, which that did not happen in Memphis, although the winds took its toll on Memphis. A lot of it was covered over, and it wasn't until a lot of this was discovered in the 1800s by English and German archaeologists who came and dug. Now, this Tanis was a city that also had these big, huge buildings and these rock statues of the different types of animals and so forth, but it was apparently not as famous today as the things that were found lower in Memphis, Tutankhamun's tomb and so forth, but yet I was reading they were just as great up in Tanis. But in the year, around the year of Jesus, Strabo, the geographer, came with the Roman troops that had attacked Egypt with Antony and Cleopatra and defeated them. And he went around and he went to Tanis, and there was nothing there. He didn't even find the city. They just know from the name that this was the area of Tanis. But then when he went to Memphis, he was able to see the ruins of Memphis and the giant buildings and so forth, and talks about it that in his geography over 2,000 years ago. You can read it. I have a whole set of Strabo's geography. So it says the rulers of Tanis will be morons. Well, people complain. They say, well, moron, that's a slang word today. Why would you use that? Well, it's not a fool, because a fool is completely a different word. In a mori, we get moron, comes from that. And a moros is a singular. And I just said, well, I'm going to put this in here. People might not like it, and they don't think it's, but it will give them an idea that there is something here that's not quite the same as being a fool. Aphron, I believe, is a fool. So they were going to be moronish. And the wise, the Sophie, counselors of the king, their counsel will be moronish, moron thesite, excuse me. How shall you say to the king, well, we are sons of discerning men, sons of kings from the beginning? Well, where are they now, the wise ones of yours? And let them announce to you and say, what the Lord of hosts planned against Egypt. So the people that are wise, that are in Egypt, what do they know as far as what God has planned? How do we know what God has planned? Well, we really don't, except for what we read in the Bible and the purposes of God and the things that he prophesies in the future. So we do know some things, but as far as in our own lives, it's a plan of God, I believe we have, and we just have to allow God to run our lives and go around as best we can through all the trials that we run across all the time, every day, it seems like sometime, and go to the Lord for help. So these other people here didn't have the Lord. They had gods, but these gods were not true gods. And they thought they were, of course, and they were able to control the people by having these gods and a clergy of sorts, priesthood, and these priests would tell the people what they had to do, and it was a whole system of controlling the people. Where with Jesus, we may be controlled by somebody physically. If you're in jail or you're in the army, there's not a whole lot you can do. You're in under control of somebody, but yet we do have the freedom of the Lord in our thought process and so forth. And then if you're fortunate enough to live in a country like the United States that has freedom, then you're able to praise the Lord however you would like. You're not prohibited. There are some countries that are Christian that will not allow you to do certain things. You have to go along with the clergy of that country. But anyway, it says here, the rulers of Tanis failed, and the rulers of Memphis are haughty. So now that Memphis was that other city that was further south. Now, and they shall cause Egypt to wander, and the tribes. For the Lord mixed to them a spirit, pneuma, pneumatics, addicted to a delusion, and they caused Egypt to wander in all her works, as the ones being intoxicated wanders, and the one vomiting together. So he's relating their wandering, their life actions is like somebody that was drunk and staggering all over, and somebody else that was throwing up next to him. And there wasn't a very nice way of describing the people. That basically is describing people that don't have God in their lives. If you have God in your life, then you have a certain amount of control of yourself and in your behavior, and you have a purpose to what you're going to be doing. And so the walking with Christ is way different than walking with a false god. And there will not be work for the Egyptians, which shall make head or tail, or beginning or end. In that day the Egyptians will be as women, in fear and in trembling in front of the hand of the Lord of hosts, which he shall put upon them. Well, today Egypt is run by a semi-military dictator that overthrew a Muslim ruler that was elected, and the Muslim religion is predominant in Egypt. There are some Christians, Coptic Christians, but mostly the Muslim religion runs it all, and it's a country that has a history of greatness, but like the other ones, like the Romans, they're nowhere as great as they had been. And here the future for them is described right here. They're going to be as women without any power. And then it continues even more, and it says, and the place of the Jews will be to the Egyptians for a fearful thing. Egypt is right next to Israel. The Sinai Desert separates the two. The Sinai is fairly large. I'm not sure how far across it is, 200 or 300 miles. Seems like on the map. I might be wrong on that. But just nomads live in the Sinai. So there is this separation. But the Jews will be, Israel will be a fearful thing to the Egyptians, which I can see that already because the Egyptians have fought Israel, I believe, 3 times and been defeated 3 times. And the one time they had a ruler called Gamal Abdel Nasser, and he attacked Israel thinking that they were going to wipe them out, but yet the opposite happened to the Egyptians, and the whole army could have been completely wiped out if it wasn't for the United Nations and Soviet Union stopping Israel from doing that. So the Egyptians have a fearful respect for Israel right now, but they could still come out and come against Israel, and if it did, it would probably be the final time. And anyone who might name it, that is Israel, to them, the Egyptians, shall fear because of the plan which the Lord of hosts planned against it. Now, it'd be interesting to see what the Egyptians and the Muslims think about Isaiah's prophecy here. In that day there will be Pentapolis, 5 cities. Pentagon is a 5-sided building in Washington, D.C. There will be 5 cities in Egypt speaking and I had tongue, glossy, literally it's a tongue, but it should be language, speaking the language of the Canaanites. Now, it's kind of interesting because the Canaanites, I don't know what language they have, because the Egyptians today, I believe, speak Arabic, and the Canaanites were in Israel, and the Israel speaks Hebrew, so I'm not exactly speaking the tongue of the Canaanites unless he's using this as a description of the people that were in the land at that time of when this is going to happen. And they're going to be swearing by an oath to the name of the Lord of Sabaoth, of hosts. And the one city shall be called City of Asadek. In the Greek is Asadek. And the King James has a city of destruction. And I read an article trying to find out about this city of Asadek and the name. It was basically the city of destruction in the Hebrew is what the Hebrew Bible that they have today. But it means in Greek, the city of righteousness, which to me falls in way, way better. It's going to be called the city of righteousness. In that day there will be an altar to the Lord. I don't see where it's the city of destruction, the King James. The King James comes from the Hebrew, and this is the Greek. And people that explain the difference say, well, the Greek was made to fit the Hebrew word tzedakah. And tzedakah, I'm not exactly sure how it's pronounced, but that would be city of righteousness. But yet, the Greek Old Testament here was translated 200 or 300 years before Christ by the rabbis. So surely they would have known, and they used the city of righteousness. And so I don't know why the King James and why the Hebrew has it different, but I think this makes more sense. So, city of Asadek. In that day there will be an altar to the Lord in the region of the Egyptians. Wow. And now what region that is, if it's in the Sinai or actually in Egypt itself. And a monument at its border to the Lord. Monument, now the border right now is right at the Sinai. It's to the eastern edge of the Sinai desert, right next to Israel. Now Israel did take it all the way up to almost to the Nile, so it could be that the border would be all the way to the Nile River also, if Egypt was destroyed by Israel in the future. So there's going to be an altar, and there's going to be a monument at the border. And it says, and it will be for a sign into the eon to the Lord in the place of Egypt. For they shall cry out to the Lord because of the ones afflicting them. And apparently the Egyptians are going to cry out to God. That's amazing. So if you're a Muslim, then Isaiah is prophesying that the country, one of the strongest countries of Muslim countries, is going to be crying out to Yahweh, the God of Israel, because of ones afflicting them in the future. And he, Yahweh, Jehovah, shall send to them a man who shall deliver them. By judging, he shall deliver them. Well, the deliverer we know is Jesus. And I'm saying a man who shall deliver them. I'm not exactly sure if he's referring to Jesus here or another person, but by judging, he shall deliver them. Some type of a judge. And the Lord will be made known to the Egyptians, and the Egyptians shall know the Lord in that day. So they become, now, are they Jewish, or is this a time of Christians? I don't know. A good question. And they know the Lord. Hopefully it's Jesus. And that's a very good possibility that, because there are quite a few Christians in Egypt today, and they might take over and go to Lord Jesus Christ. And they shall make a sacrifice offering and a gift offering. So there, it sounds like in something to do with the temple, maybe during the 1,000-year reign, and shall vow vows to the Lord and shall render them. So the sacrifice and gift offering could very well be in the Jerusalem of the millennium. And the Lord shall strike the Egyptians with a calamity, and he will heal them. So what this is, we don't know, but some calamity. And they shall be turned towards the Lord, and he shall listen to them and shall heal them with healing. So somehow everything is going to be changed with Egypt. In that day there will be a way or a road of Egypt to the Assyrians. The Assyrians were the people that lived in the northern part of Mesopotamia, almost up into what is Turkey today. The Assyrians became Christians, and the Christians are still up there. They're being persecuted right now by the civil war that's going on in Syria. If you go to Wikipedia and you look up Assyrians, you'll see where they're mainly all Christians, and they speak the Syriac language, and they have their own Syriac scriptures of the Bible, Old and the New Testament. So this road will probably go up from Egypt, and it'll go through Israel up north, I would think, to into Syria someplace where the Assyrians are. And Egypt will go to the Assyrians, and the Egyptians shall serve to the Assyrians. So there will be some type of a trade or of some sort. In that day, Israel will be third with the Egyptians and with the Assyrians, being blessed in the land. So instead of having the Assyrians in Syria, in Egypt, Muslim countries attacking Israel all the time, they'll all be together of some sort. And exactly how that's going to pan out, when it's going to pan out, don't know, but it is going to happen, it says. Well, which the Lord of hosts blessed the land, saying, Blessed be my people. Wow, the one in Egypt, the one among the Assyrians, and my inheritance, Israel. So this future scenario of God given to us through the prophet Isaiah, of what we can see and what is coming. We continue next, gets into the personal life of Isaiah. We'll find out what happens to Isaiah in chapter 20. Hope you'll join us, and God bless.